Well, it all started out as a pretty ordinary Monday morning. I just 5:30 in the morning. I was up, 1.5 hour drive to Wagga for work, and the thing that was a bit unusual that morning was that I was very fidgety in the car, and I was playing with the radio and the heater and the window winders, and for some reason or other I just couldn't get comfortable. And then I realised that my upper body was quite warm, but my legs were cold. But I didn't take much notice of it. Yet by the time I got to Wagga to go to the shop to get some morning tea, I noticed my legs didn't sort of want to work properly when I got out of the car. And I thought, oh, I've just been sitting for too long, I'll be right. And then I started to feel very uncomfortable. As it happens, I carry a first aid kit, and in my first aid kit happens to be a blood pressure monitor. So I got that and wrapped that around my arm and read it, and my blood pressure was looking at something like 193/87 or something, which was right off the planet for me. And I thought, that doesn't look real good. But I thought, oh, it'll settle down, and I continued about 5 k's up the road to work, and by the time I got there, I had this very heavy pain on my chest. And I thought, this is not good. So I rang my boss and said, look, I'm out at the front gate, but I'm not coming in today. I'm going to the hospital for a checkup. And so I actually drove myself to Wagga Hospital. And when I went in there, I said, look, I've got some pains in the chest. I don't feel very well, and I think I'd really like a checkup. And so the first thing I did was check my blood pressure, and it had come back almost down to normal. So they weren't too concerned about that. They then put me on the ECG machine with the little tabs all over my chest, and the ECG came back normal. So then they said, well, we better do a blood test. So they did a blood test and sent that off to pathology, and came back an hour or so later, and no enzyme changes, no sign of a heart attack. That had everybody a little bit puzzled, and they said, well, we know there's something wrong, otherwise you wouldn't have come in. And taking into account that I had my work clothes on as well. And so they sent me around to another department where they put me on the treadmill for a bit of a workout. And I thought, oh, this will be easy, because I'd been used to climbing up, like 14 flights of stairs up to the top of a 7-story building on a daily basis, and working pretty hard. And I actually thought I was one of the fitter people on the crew at the construction site where I was working. They put me on the treadmill, and within half a minute the operator said, well, I'm not going any further with this test. I don't want you having a heart attack in my office. He said, you've got a problem. And so they took me back to the hospital, and then from there they transferred me to another section where they put me on a big table with a X-ray camera over the top, and did what they call an angiogram. And the angiogram consisted of laying on this big table with my arm outstretched while they poke a wire in at my wrist, and that went all the way up to my heart. They pumped dye into my heart, and I was able to watch it on the screen. And they pointed out that I had 2 major restrictions in each of 3 main arteries to my heart. And so they said, well, we certainly know you have a problem. We need to get something done about it. They took me back to the ward, and by the time I got back there, they said, we've already booked you in at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney for a bypass surgery. Whilst I was in the Wagga Hospital, they gave me a book, which was an information booklet on what bypass surgery is, why you need it, what's involved in having it, what to expect when you come out of it. And it was quite a comprehensive book. And they said, make sure you read this before you go into the surgery. And so that was very good advice from Wagga, and from there I was flown to Sydney, patient ambulance to St Vincent's, and I spent a day in pre-op, which was basically just doing a whole lot of various blood tests and things like that to make sure that I was suitable to do the surgery. It also included ultrasounds and x-rays, and with the ultrasound they actually found out that it wasn't just 3 arteries were blocked but 4, and also that I had a damaged valve in my heart, and so that made it an even more complex surgery. On the Thursday morning I was taken into the surgical ward, or into the operating theatre, and yeah, the last thing I remember was somebody saying, "I will just give you this to calm you down." And I was actually under anaesthetic, knocked out, being worked on for eight hours. And they said it was an extra long procedure because of the fact that they had to replace the valve in my heart. When I started to wake up, I was out of the operating theatre and actually in intensive care. I was well and truly wired up with all sorts of pipes and wires and contacts and air lines going to special pads on my legs to keep the circulation going and things like that. But as well as that, I was in somewhat intense pain. But also, even though I was semi-conscious, I went into a state which was described in the book as hallucinations. And had I not been pre-warned through reading the book and through the instructions that I was given in the hospital prior to surgery, I would have actually thought I was going mad. If I'd been put in a coffin and buried and had dirt thrown on me, I don't think I could have felt any worse. Being conscious and yet feeling like you were dead. Everything in my mind was black, and yet even within the blackness there was strange activities going on and things going on which in some ways would have come from past memory, but in other ways were completely messed up and could only be described, as they say it in the book, as hallucinogenic. Fortunately, they gave me a little button, and they said, if the pain gets too much or if you can't cope, press this little button. And what the little button did was to put a measured dose of morphine direct into my bloodstream through a little pipe in my neck. And that gave me about 45 minutes of relief. As I came out of that 45-minute period, I was able to remember what one of the nurses had told me, to try and move my leg up and down, and then the other leg up and down, and then the other arm up and down, and so on. And that would assist in speeding up my recovery. Coming out of the surgery was probably the worst part of the whole thing, because you're semi-conscious, nurses are asking you to do things, the brain won't cooperate with the motor system and your body doesn't want to work, and you've got all these other weird things going on in your head as a result of the anaesthetics. This took quite a while to wear off, and in the meantime I also had considerable amount of pain in my back, which was pretty intense, and I found out later that that was actually from the hinging of the back of my spine when they opened the front up. And of course all the nerves that come out of there are all been messed around with. So yeah, but that subsided. I was actually in intensive care for 3 days before I was moved up to the ward to recuperate. I had another strange experience in the ward where I actually had what some people might call an out-of-body experience, where I was actually up in the corner of the room looking down and saw myself on the bed. And I could see everything in the room. I could see the bed, the bedside table, all the pipes and gauges and things hanging out of the back wall, but from a totally different perspective. And then when I looked at this person laying in the bed, I realised it was me, but instead of looking 67, I only looked like I was 35. And it had me a little bit puzzled. And then I sort of woke up, rolled over, and there wasn't anyone else in the bed, and thought, oh, that was a bit strange. But apparently it's not uncommon after this type of surgery, considering that your heart and lungs have been immobilised and your whole body has been running on a machine for 8 hours, for this sort of thing to happen. I guess the biggest relief that I had through the whole thing came about because of the documentation that I'd been given. Firstly, in Wagga, I was given this publication, which is put out by the National Heart Foundation, and it gave a lot of information as to what was involved in the operation, in the surgery, why it was needed. This was followed up by another one, cardiac surgery, that I was given in St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, which was much more comprehensive and covers all sorts of things that I've spoken about, plus how to go about assisting your recovery, what you can and what you can't do. And as well as that, it was also followed up by a little brochure which has information on things like getting out of bed, driving, how to lift things, reminder not to overdo it, and various things that you really need to know when you're coming out of this sort of invasive surgery. This seeming out-of-body experience happened about 4 days after the surgery, and it was only a day or so after that I realised that I was only about 35 when I had had previous cancer surgery, and so maybe it was something in my subconscious that had connected the two events. But in all of this, I can only say that my operation was what you might call a textbook case. Everything that has happened to me before, during and after the surgery is exactly as it was explained in the book. And I am just so fortunate and so glad that I was aware of these things before I actually went into the procedure, because otherwise some parts of it, particularly coming out of the anaesthetic, would have been extremely frightening, and I wouldn't have known how to cope had I not had the confidence in the medical staff and the confidence of knowing that it was only temporary and that I would get through it. The heart operation itself consisted of taking a large artery out of my left leg, which was then used to replace the 4 blocked arteries that are attached to my heart. And in doing so, they actually just cut my leg in a few small places from the ankle to the groin and took the vein out without actually opening the leg up. And this enabled the recovery process so much that within 4 days they had the bandages off and had the air to it, and the healing really started to take place. It took about a week for all the bruising to subside and the normal colour to come back into my leg, and now 4 weeks after the event, apart from a little bit of discoloration, you would hardly know that I'd had any surgery at all. The incision in my chest, which was opened up, also healed up within about 4 days. There were no stitches involved in that. The chest was all sealed up. The bone inside is actually connected back together with stainless steel clips, which remain inside my chest. The outer skin surface was pulled together with special tape and taped up, and once again within 4 to 5 days that was also removed, and the incision was actually physically healed. Although there was still quite a bit of discoloration and discomfort, it was obvious to see that the healing process was well underway. And now, 4.5 weeks out, there's nothing more than a discoloured mark down the middle of my chest where the whole thing was opened up to do this major invasive surgery.
Well, it was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was asleep, believe it or not, and I woke up with chest pains, and I thought, oh, don't like that much. And having done that before, sort of 7 or 8 months before, when I had the stents put in, I thought I won't muck about, and I just dialed 000. This time I didn't have the problems I had originally, so they didn't. They just monitored what was going on. They gave me stuff for pain. They shot me full of aspirin and anginine and all that sort of stuff. But I was only in the hospital bed for a very short time because they moved me overnight, and then they moved me to Albury Hospital, from Albury Hospital to Wodonga, because they wanted a bed. 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm starving hungry. Breakfast is coming, and so was the visiting surgeon, a fellow by the name of Tim Landy. And I know Tim because I've visited him a couple of times before. He looked at me and says, "What the hell are you doing in here?" He looked at the chart and said, "You're going to Melbourne straight away." Ah, now, that's when the fun started. How am I going to get to Melbourne? Why have I got to get to Melbourne? The first thing is, there's no facilities up here to fix my problem. So they're going to get me down by ambulance, but there's no ambulances. They tried for about 3 hours to get an ambulance, and finally they got me an aeroplane. That was good. It probably didn't waste much time because the aeroplane was only half an hour and we were down there. But no problem with the flight, get down to there, and on the way to the hospital, I don't remember much more. I remember thinking to myself, what a mongrel place Melbourne is, tramwires everywhere, tram lines, and the traffic was completely insane. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, who'd want to live here? And I don't remember any more than that. I remember going into the hospital, and I remember nothing else. So whether that was a residue from the operation, it's just wiped out my memory from there on. I reckon I've lost about 3 weeks. The next thing I remember is going into theatre, and there's a doctor in white saying, "My name is Dr. Whoever," and I can't remember the name. And that was it. They stuck a needle in my arm, and I didn't have much more to say anything. And I had no idea what they were going to do, apart from that I had a problem and the stents were blocked up. They didn't know how much, but they reckoned they were blocked up because I think they did scans and stuff at Albury. I'm trying to remember now what was going on. It was all such a big rush. But they never told me anything about what to expect after the surgery. And I expected a bit of pain and strain and all the things that happen sort of post-surgery. But I certainly wasn't aware of all the other things that happened to me afterwards. After seeing the doctor in white, there was nothing. And I woke up in an absolute total blackness. There was no sound, there was no light, there was nothing. And here I am, my mind is wandering around inside this blackness, and the first thing I thought was that I'm bloody dead. You know, I have to be dead. Where am I? And all this sort of thing. And there was nothing, and it was forever. It went on and on. Everything was so. And then eventually the black changed to a sort of pinky colour. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? But still absolute silence. No reference to any time. There was nothing, no benchmark for me to look at and say, I'm here, and the time is that. Is it breakfast time? Is it lunchtime? Is it daytime, nighttime? Nothing. And absolute silence, not even a clock on the wall. Nothing ticking, nothing, no sound. And I yelled and screeched and carried on, and nothing. No reply from anywhere. And then it changed. It changed. I found I could open and close my eyes. And the whole thing changed. It went from this pinky colour to black, but it was like somebody had put a big black sheet over me, and it was full of little ripped holes everywhere. And there was all that sort of stuff. And then it would go into blackness, and there'd be like a great big purple curved sawtooth thing through the middle and white lines through it and all sorts of stuff. And then later on, I looked around and I actually saw the room. The first thing, or before that though, what happened was I thought to myself, these are curtains. Why have we got curtains in here? All the questions that go through your mind. And I saw the curtains move and I yelled out, and I said to this joker, "What's the time?" I wanted to know where I was. And I was lost, completely disconnected from everything. "What's the time?" Nothing. 6 o'clock. All right. And then I went out again. For months and months I was out, or it seemed that long. For months and months I was disconnected again. Nothing. And then I wake up, pink walls again. "What's the time?" 6 o'clock. And I thought, how can it be 6 o'clock again? And then out like a light again. And the third time I said, "What's the time?" He said, 6 o'clock, be quiet and go to sleep. And I don't remember much after that. It was sort of a long time. And then I saw, this time, was a room, cupboards, doors and windows and things like that. But when I shut my eyes, I saw them again, but in a negative way. Everything was black and white. And I thought, hey, what's going on here? And honestly, I had no idea, because every time I changed my state by closing my eyes, I changed everything that I saw. Open my eyes and the room was there, close them and it would go opposite way, and there was still virtually no sound. Nothing. No one to talk to me, nobody to say, "How you going, mate?" Anything. And it was total aloneness. Disconnected. They never told me anything. In fairness to them, they may have done, and I may have lost that, because I have lost about 3 weeks of time from my life. And I can't tell you where I was, apart from the fact that it was empty and black. So I don't know. They may have said something. But I don't know. I don't remember. Well, I remember when I first became a bit more lucid, I called Isabel. I've managed to, I don't know how, but I managed to get hold of my mobile phone, and I called Isabel and said I'm awake. And I wasn't supposed to be. Now, I remember calling Isabel, but I don't remember anything else about that. Not long after that, I called Paul and thought, well, I better see how he's going and what he's up to, and I'll give him a warning, because by this time I'd seen some pretty horrible things with all the hallucinations, and the amount of pain I was getting and stuff was absolutely unreal. So I thought, well, if I warn him, at least he'll know what to expect and he won't go completely off into the deep end, which is where I reckon I went. Anyway, I spoke to him about it, and he said, oh, they've given me a book on all this. And I thought, well, that would have been nice. But no, not for this bunny. I got chucked in the deep end, what I thought. Now, again, in all fairness to the people in the hospital, they may have talked to me about it, but I certainly don't remember it. I reckon I've lost about 3 weeks. Somewhere there's 3 weeks out of my life, and there's a few patches that come in and out, and that's about all. Not long after talking to Paul, 2 of my friends came to visit me, and my recollection of that visit was me sitting behind a table, which was nonsense because I was flat on my back in bed, and my colleague was sitting on the other side of the table. The whole room was black. My red sawtooth was through the room again, and there was white lines everywhere, and over on the left-hand side was a cave, and there was unspeakable things going on in the cave. It was something nasty, and I don't know what it was. And on the right-hand side was a desk, and there was a nurse behind the desk. And I frightened the hell out of my mate. I could see it in his face. His eyes were as big as dinner plates, and he didn't know what was going on. I could see he's thinking to himself, what's he on about? Because I was talking about some pretty wild things, I think. Because I read it in his face, you know. It was something that really bothered him. And I spoke to him about a week or so later, and I said, Shane, I think I frightened you in hospital. He said, you did. He said, you frightened the crap out of me. So, goodness knows what I was like. I must have been right off the planet. And all this blackness and stuff was there, switching in and out for what seemed to be weeks and weeks after I came out of the anaesthetic. They did tell me that the morphine they pumped into me was the cause of that. But I wish someone had warned me. I'm a logical person, and what happens here is I go through steps and I eliminate them, and that's my job, troubleshooting. But I couldn't troubleshoot what was going on there. I didn't have any knowledge of the process or what was happening, and it was pretty frightening, I can tell you. And I believed there for quite some time that I was dead. There was nothing, you know, and I thought to myself, if I'm dead, why isn't there a tunnel full of bright lights and somewhere nice to go and all that? And there wasn't any of that, and I was really mad about that too. I thought to myself, they've taken me out of that. That's quite neat. Yeah. It was a bit lumpy at the top originally, but that's flattened right out, and I'm happy with that. And goodness knows why they've got those three bullet holes across there. Yeah. But it may have had something to do with the tubes they used, because they bypass when they kill you, which is what they do. They break your chest in halves and they kill you, shut everything down, and your brain is kept alive by like a dialysis machine. So what you do is you stay alive in bits, and once they finish with it, they stick you all back together again, wire you up with a bit of stainless here because they've broken your chest in halves, and hopefully you all get glued back together. But it takes a long time for your mind, your consciousness, and your soul and your body to come back to one. I had an infection in my left leg where they stripped the veins from to do the grafts, and it was so bad that I couldn't even put a pair of pyjamas on because my leg was so swollen, and it took me a while to get on top of that and pull it down. It's still causing me trouble. My local GP is looking after that. That was the reason I spent 6 weeks in hospital rather than about 3, and it wasn't a very nice stay because of the pain that I was getting in my leg. It's pretty well on. It's left just as well I'm not going any beauty contest, because I tell you I wouldn't pass now. But not that it matters, because nobody's going to see me anyway. Not at my age. I had a look at Paul's the other day. He came up here and said, look at that, and I thought, wow, what a magic job. So the techniques, even though it was within the same hospital, St Vincent's in Sydney, St Vincent's in Melbourne, even though it was done by the same hospital, the techniques were different. And I guess that depends on the doctors too. Leg infections are fairly common. I think with the way they did my leg and the way they did Paul's leg, I would have been more susceptible to infection. Because instead of Paul's got a series of little half-inch slots cut in his leg all the way up. I've got a continuous line from my ankle all the way up to my groin. And I had an infection just above the knee and one down at the ankle. Now the ankle is still wide open, so there's nothing I can do with that until such time as the swelling goes down, and then maybe I can pull it together. I might have to get it scraped and mucked about with and stitched up again, I don't know. It's like if you do a job, there's a dozen different ways of doing it, and although the procedure's the same, the method was a little different as far as stripping the veins out of my leg. So I don't know why or what or when and how different surgeons, and I guess they all operate, they're all pretty clever, but they all operate their way. And I guess if you're taught one way, you use that, unless you discover something that's better. I don't know. Left me with some pretty nasty mess there, and a few hard words I said about surgeons and infections in the last few weeks, I tell you.